to Technology Essentials in Education Practical Ideas for Educators. I'm your host, Dr. Monica Burns. This week's episode is titled How to Tackle Student Data. When I work with schools and districts, formative assessment is always a popular topic. But one of the big questions I get is, how can we tackle student data? So that's our focus today. How to tackle all of the data that comes our way as educators. It's just me today, so let's dive in. This episode is part of a special bonus series presented by Jotform. Jotform Enterprise provides an all-in-one solution to streamline administrative tasks, enhance community engagement, and foster innovation. Using their no-code drag-and-drop forms and workflows, your teams can securely collect and store data, automate routine tasks, and collaborate on team resources. Educational institutions are also eligible for a 30% discount on Jotform Enterprise. Head to their website to learn more. jotform.com/enterprise/education. Today on the podcast, we're talking about how to tackle student data. And that word tackle is kind of strategic for today's episode, right? Sometimes it does feel like a struggle that we have all of this information on what students know, what they understand, where they might need some extra support, and we need to do something with that information. So, we're going to, in this episode, unpack some of the reasons why we collect student data in the first place, some ways to collect student data, and then really thinking about what kind of data you're collecting and how to review that information. And we'll talk a bit about why digital tools are helpful during this process and how you can really make any type of data collection you're doing more actionable. So today, we're looking at this topic of student data collection through the lens of K-12 education, so across grade levels and across different subject areas. And, I can share from my personal experience. I'm a former classroom teacher that collecting information, collecting formative assessment data was such a big part of my day. However, it really came down to the quality of that information I was collecting, whether that was looking at screencasts that students made that captured their voice and had them maybe on video, whether it was using digital forms like a checklist to collect data as I was observing students, or perhaps having them fill something out, right, and hit submit so that I could see what they were working on. So, lots of different ways to think about data collection, when it might happen during the school day, and then, of course, your why. So, why do we collect student data? Well, we do it because we want to identify what kids already know, what gaps there might be in their understanding, what misconceptions they might have, all with the purpose of guiding future instruction. So, formative assessment, data collection, really drives our instruction. It helps us make instructional decisions, like what's going to happen in 5 minutes if I'm collecting some data and reviewing it in real time, what's going to happen tomorrow if I'm reviewing that student data I've collected at the end of the day, or what I might do next week or the next unit of study. So it's really all about informing or driving, right, future instruction by checking in to see what kids already know, what gaps they might have in understanding, what misconceptions, right, things they think they might know that aren't exactly accurate, and then using that information to make decisions. So in an elementary classroom, This might include quick checks that we do on something like reviewing student sight words, right? To help us figure out what group they might go in if we are creating some tailored, right, intervention or some tailored reading groups for them. It might be reviewing student responses to math problems that they're solving to see where there's maybe some gaps in applying a particular strategy for problem solving. In a middle school or high school classroom, we might do a pre-assessment at the beginning of a unit. Maybe there's a unit on a time period of historical events that are coming up, and you want to see what kids already know, right? Particularly at the secondary level. We're looking at course content, like a social studies example. Students may have had some exposure, some experience with that content in the past. We don't want to repeat something unless we need to. And it gives us some information, that baseline of where students are at. So the goal is really to support student growth, not just getting numbers to put on a spreadsheet, right? That information we're gathering should really tell us something, paint a picture, tell a story, right, of student understanding. That's what our goal is when we are collecting student data. Even though there's a variety of ways to do it, and we'll talk about that in a moment, our goal really is to help students grow, right, in whatever area of instruction we may be focused in. So when we think about our why, right, it's great to establish our why, but then we have to have a strategy, right, or a way to put those big ideas into action. And there's different ways to collect formative assessment data. And whether you are in a very tech-rich classroom where you use lots of technology and have access to lots of different things, or whether you are very much more in a paper and pencil mode, right? Formative assessment has been happening before we had access to some of the great digital tools that you might use as part of your everyday practice. So, some traditional methods that maybe have a digital connection now, depending on what tools you're using, are exit slips or exit tickets. This is a traditional check for understanding that happens at the end of a lesson. It's our way to see, what did you get today, right? What did you understand from today? Where do you still need some support? What questions may a student have? Again, informing your instruction for the very next day. So it happens at the end, typically, of a lesson or maybe a few activities. And then again, is telling us what we need to do next, giving us some information that will help us plan and prepare better, whether that's for everyone who needs help or just a few individual students. Now, another traditional method is a short quiz. You might have students complete a few multiple choice questions. You might be very familiar with this if you're from the Scantron generation of bubbling things in or collecting things that students have bubbled in. I'm on both sides of that too. Or it may be more open-ended questions, or you give students a prompt or a sentence starter and you ask them to fill in, right, some more information. And then you, in your mind, have a sense of what your success criteria is. We'll talk more about that in a moment, but like what you're looking for. Another traditional method is classroom observations. Maybe you have a clipboard with a class roster, and you, a few days a week, every day of the week, are looking, observing with one thing in mind. Like, can every student do this one thing? And I'm making notation. And now, when I look at that at the end of the day or the end of the week, I might decide that some students need a particular intervention. I'm going to pull a small group, or we're ready to move on to the next thing. Now, as we think about digital tools here and some of the ease and efficiency it can bring us in collecting this information, in organizing student data, right? There's also student benefits too, right? By giving them more options. Maybe it's using voice tools, dictation tools, right? A few different things that might add to their ability to give you some great high quality information also. But one example of a switch from more traditional to digital that made a big impact in my classroom as a upper elementary school teacher was taking those classroom observations, that physical clipboard I just mentioned, and turning it into a digital form. So, what I did was I created a form where I was the only person who was using that form. I wasn't sending it out to kids. Instead, I filled out that form every couple days, right? Every time I was using it to collect information from students. And what I would do is I would, same thing like with a clipboard, walk around the room, have student conversations, maybe have a small group. And then my notes or observations, I would type them into the form. I would submit the form and it would go into a space where I could see all of the results, if you will, right? All the submissions that were just for me to better have a picture of individual needs. And then, of course, trends within the group. So there are definitely traditional methods that you might now take a digital spin on that just weren't quite available before. And although I love sticky notes and I love the clipboard, right, having something in my hand, this was a much better way for me to organize information, collect data, and share it with any other person. Maybe it was a co-teacher a couple years for me, or a support specialist who was working with a couple kids that I would have, right? So whoever it was that I wanted to share that information with, I could now send it to them in a lot more smoother way than me sorting through my own, personal organizational sticky note binder system. This just streamlined the whole process. A quick note from the presenter of today's episode, Jotform. Jotform Enterprise lets you build a form in minutes. Student survey forms, homework submission forms, online quizzes, and so much more. You can start from scratch, or if you want to get a head start, check out their collection of free form templates designed with teachers, schools, and districts in mind. Learn more about Jotform and how educational institutions can get a 30% discount on Jotform Enterprise. Head to their website to learn more. Jotform.com/enterprise/education. So, digital tools can definitely save time by automating how you're collecting data, right, and how you are organizing it, making it a lot easier to review all of that information. So now that we think about our why and what this might look like in action, right, our strategy, you want to step back and make sure that you are collecting data that you really need. We could collect data on all sorts of things, but if I'm not going to use that information, what's the point of me taking the time to do it? So we want to make sure that we're collecting actionable information. And this is where that term success criteria that I mentioned before. So if you want students to master a particular skill, how will you know? Like, how will you know that they actually understand this? Is it because they solved that addition question correctly and they got this answer? Is it because they named a literary element as they were reviewing a piece of literature? Is it because they gave 5 examples of how a document was a primary source? Whatever that measurement is that's going to tell you they for sure understand something, that's your success criteria. So you might decide, right, that you are looking for just one thing as you're reviewing a piece of content kids have given to you or submitted. And that's what you are using to decide, right? Did they get it, right? Have they mastered? Are they working towards something? Do they need some extra help? Or what are you noticing in their responses that doesn't address the success criteria, but maybe gives you some other information too? So this is where you will, of course, decide, right, what it is that you want to see, ideally from a student to show they understand something, and then backing up to say, what type of question am I going to ask to make sure they understand? And so you might have information you're collecting that is more quantitative, like more numbers, like that math example. Like if everyone says 72 as their answer, I know that they've got it. But if a student, right, explains their thinking and they don't mention a certain vocabulary word, well, maybe I'm looking for that too. Maybe that's part of my success criteria to say, like, they've understood this, right? So that would be a kind of a combination of the quantitative and then the qualitative piece. So qualitative data may be something that you're looking at with certain considerations. Maybe you have a rubric that goes along with it. Like if I see this, I have a sense that a student understands this, or if I see this response, I want to follow up and ask them an additional question. So when you're collecting information from students, sometimes when you know your success criteria, what you want to see, you'll then be able to say multiple choice question will tell me this. Open-ended response will tell me this, right? And then you are formulating the type of question you are going to give students, then you're collecting that information, and then you're reviewing that information with your success criteria in mind. So as you're looking at this data, or as you're reviewing this data you've collected, there are a few strategies that you may want to consider. First, if you're looking at a whole class set of data, you may look for patterns or trends within the group, right? Is there anything that you can say that would be about everyone or most of the group that could inform your whole class instruction moving forward? Are there any outliers who have demonstrated mastery already, right, of this or early on as you're starting to collect data from students? Or are there any who are showing that they are really struggling to do that? So if you're looking whole class, right, you're looking for those big patterns or trends within a group, you're looking for outliers, and then you're going to make a plan, right, on how to address all of the students using that whole class data. If you are reviewing data for one student in particular, you might also look for patterns or trends to say, what things were the student doing really well? When were they finding success? Where were they struggling? And see if there's patterns within that, right? Or gaps that you are looking to address, right? In terms of their understanding over a period of time. So you might review data with the whole class mindset and an individual mindset, right? Depending on your goals for a particular unit of study or kind of what's next for you. Now, you might also decide to review the data collaboratively, with a grade level team, with a partner teacher, right? Depending on how you do planning together. When you are reviewing data as a grade level team, you're looking less at the individual in that moment, at least to get started, and you're typically looking more for the patterns and trends across the grade level. What's happening in all of the classrooms? What's happening in just a few classrooms? If we have outliers in these two classes, can we bring those students together, even if they don't spend the whole day together, right? Spend this time together so that we can address their needs more strategically. So when you are reviewing the data collaboratively, you might look for larger trends, and your action items might be grade level wide, or to create small groups that go across classes to make sure you're giving everyone exactly what they need. You might ask questions as a team or in your own practice, like, what do most students understand? Where are the biggest gaps, right, within this group? And then narrowing down, right, your review of the data to that individual level to make sure everyone has what they need. So digital tools can absolutely help you tackle student data. They can be very helpful, right, throughout the process of formative assessment data collection. So for some tools, there's automation where it can quickly identify trends, right? Or you'll get a spreadsheet of results and you can see pretty quickly what the trends are. There's that accessibility piece I mentioned earlier, giving easy access to data, whether that's sharing an individual student's data with a co-teacher or a family member, or reviewing class data with someone else in your school or district community. So this is something where you might also find digital tools help you give feedback a little bit more quickly because you're reviewing data in real time and you can get right back to students with some actionable next steps. So speaking of action taking, there are some specific strategies you might take as you're tackling student data and thinking about your next steps. So, the first off is differentiating instruction, right? You might decide that you're creating small groups based on shared needs that you've seen when reviewing student formative assessment data. For example, right, if you are in a classroom where you're noticing that four of your fifth graders, right, are struggling with context clues as they are reviewing informational texts, and the rest of the class seems to get this, right, has mastered that skill, you might pull that group over and introduce some new strategies related to context clues just for that group, since the rest of the class is kind of ready to go using the first strategy, right, that you introduced to them. So differentiation might happen in small groups. You might have a station, rotation, or center-based model where some students are working on one thing, another group is working on another thing, and as they rotate through, they are working on different activities at different times, maybe the same activity at different times, or when they get to the station, there's an activity for their group, or when they rotate, they come to you as a station and you are working with that group on whatever that particular group needs, which might be different than another group. So this could happen very strategically, right? If you are looking at centers or stations, you might also find that everyone, right, is working at the same time, right? You are moving about a space after a mini lesson, but students are working in small groups that are based on their needs, right? Or they're working in groups where students have very different, right, needs and they are supporting one another. So different ways to consider what this might look like in action. In addition to those smaller groups, right, or the center-based or station rotation model, you might find that certain students need one-on-one support. So you might have a student that has a very specific individual need that is unlike, right, their other classmates, and you might pull that student for a one-on-one conference or one-on-one time to work together on their individual need. You might also find that as you're tackling this data that you've collected, that a student might need a bit more, right? They might need someone that's a specialist to work with them in a more dedicated situation, right? So different models and different things that you might do, right, based on the data that you've collected, which is really the core of our episode today, right, is making the most of that information that you've gathered. So you might also find that some of your strategies for taking action are not at the individual level, right? Are not at the small group level, but are instead at a whole class level. So if you have found that the majority of your students, 75% maybe of your class, right, is struggling to do this one thing, you might have some of your outliers working on something separate, and the bulk of the group, right, is working with you as you reteach a strategy or introduce something in a new way. So you are in the driver's seat, right? You are the expert for all of this. And as I mentioned before, there's lots of ways to streamline this with digital tools, whether you're using that same checklist strategy, like with the digital forms I mentioned earlier, right? Where your observations, whether you're collecting student responses to multiple choice or short answer questions, lots of ways that you can gather data, keep it organized, and then have the time, right, and the brain space to really take action on it. So, as we are together today for this episode, thinking about how to put these ideas into action, right? We collect data for lots of different reasons, and you know what your success criteria might be and what your anticipated action item is. You can decide how to collect it to make sure kids have, right, what they need. You've got the information, you've collected it, now you can decide, right, how to use it. So, as we finish up this episode with a few key points to make this EdTech easy, I would encourage you to try one strategy we talked about today. to narrow down your success criteria so you know exactly what it is that you are looking for, to try out a digital tool, maybe a form-based digital tool, and share your progress with others, whether that's a colleague, right? Or even just sending a message to me and letting me know what's working for you in your classroom. So I'm going to link out to some related resources for you on the show notes page so that you can find all the things that you can stay connected and that you can dive even deeper into this topic of how to tackle student data. A big thank you to Jotform, the presenter of today's episode and this special series. To learn more about Jotform and how educational institutions can get a 30% discount on Jotform Enterprise, head to jotform.com/enterprise/education.